The psychological toll when you're young and impressionable and vulnerable and you get bullied and you get locked in a locker and the janitor finds you after hours, it's humiliating, and you just never want to have that feeling again. And that
happened to you?
Yeah.
Wakey, and welcome back to the TD Impact Show. And today, this is going to be a fun one, my friends. This is going to be an energy explosion because in-house at Fitness Quest 10, I have my man, Pete Holman here. Pete, good morning to you.
Hoo-ha.
Yes. You guys might be out for a walk right now. You're driving the car. Whatever you're doing, let me tell you what. You are in for a treat because this guy is a force of nature. When you talk about energy, when you talk about driven, when you talk about passion and compassion, and one of the men that I know who is most purpose-driven and caring and loving men that actually is doing amazing things in the universe. Pete Holman is here in studio and is going to bless us today with some amazing words. So, Pete, I hope you're fired up.
I am fired up, and after that intro, I better deliver.
Well, you just be you because let me tell you what, if you've ever met Pete Holman, you know he is a force of nature. And if you have not, I believe that your little giddy up in your step is going to improve a little bit right now, or you're just going to sharpen the mind. We talk about the mind is like a sword, and we got to sharpen it every single day. And I want to thank all of you for all these comments coming in right now about what this podcast is doing for you, because as I interview guests, I'm always like, what's the value they can bring to help you be a better man or a better woman today? And Pete, I'm going to go through a few of these accomplishments, and I'm not going to spend 30 minutes because he's got so many accomplishments. But some of the things is 2011, Pete, I met Pete Holman at a conference because he was with TRX. He had just sold his TRX rip trainer, the rip trainer, which he invented. And this guy is out on the floor with more energy than me. I'm like, who is this guy? Right? And I was like, I want to get to know this guy. And in doing so, over the last 9-10 years of knowing Pete, here's a guy who has been a national champion in Tae-Kwon-Do. He has invented many different products, the functional training rack, the TRX rip trainer, the Glute drive, and I'm sure he's got other things in the pipeline coming up as well. And he's a physical therapist. He's a strength and conditioning coach. He's been a trainer for over 30 years. And he's still training 30-plus clients a week now in Aspen, Colorado. He travels the globe presenting, speaking. He's an author of Cruise, just came out with his first book called Cruise, which I want to hear about, Pete, today because, man, this is a fiction book that is put on your must-read book on your list because it is awesome, and I want to hear about that. But, Pete, so many accomplishments, so thank you for being on the show today.
I'm honored to be here. It's a privilege, and I've known you now for 9 years. It's hard to believe, better part of a decade, and it's been quite a ride, my friend.
I don't know where to start with all of those different interests. That resume is impressive, and when you get to know Pete, you know that. But how did this all start? Like, you have so many interests, and you're a deep soul. When I talk to you, you're a deep man. It's not just about training. How did all these interests start?
I definitely was influenced by my parents. My mom was kind of a Renaissance woman, so to speak. She was grew up in Wisconsin and Minnesota area, and ended up getting a graduate degree from a postgraduate degree from Minnesota. Went on to study at Smith College, which is a renowned college on the East Coast there, and got her doctorate in psychology. And this was, keep in mind, this was 60 years ago, 50 years ago. And so that was pretty impressive for a woman at that time to kind of achieve those levels of accomplishments. And she always interested me with her passions outside of education and academics. So we would be camping and I'd be out fishing and I'd come back. I'm like, what is that sound? Is there somebody playing the flute? And there's my mom. I'm like, what are you doing, Mom? She's like, oh, I'm learning the flute. And, so that kind of stuff resonated with me. Like it's more than just academics. It's more than athletics. What other type of personal pursuits? How are you going to actualize your human potential? And my father was the same. My father was a doctorate of psychology and a 3-sport athlete back when track and field involved bamboo pole vaulting. And he had this awesome scar that went kind of from his forearm all the way down to his middle finger. And I said, Dad, what is that scar from? That is so cool. And he's like, well, I was pole vaulting back in Westby, Wisconsin, and the pole vault broke, and they were bamboo back in the day, and it went through my arm and my hand. And so he was kind of a Renaissance man as well. So I fell in love with this, Leonardo da Vinci type philosophy of, if you studied Leonardo, amazing individual. He was a mechanical and civil engineer. He was an inventor. He was an anatomist. He was he had first renderings of helicopters, and studied the human body and kinesiology, and studied animals and how they moved and biomechanics. And that's the kind of thing that got me fired up. Like, how many things can you do in your life that you're passionate about and that you're interested in and you can grow and learn from?
Interesting. Would you say Pete Holman, the Renaissance man?
I don't know if I'm in that realm, but I'm very curious about what I can do with my human potential.
I would, because you've always struck me as a guy who's not just a great coach. I mean, I've seen you on the floor for 4 hours, and you've got the same passion, energy. 4 hours into it on the third day, and then you're writing, you're speaking, you're a physical therapist, you're an anatomist. So the same thing that Leonardo has done, Pete Holman is doing. I read something from you once, and you put out a lot of great content on your blogs, on your Instagram, on your website. And you shared, I think the driving force in my life is a fear that I will leave something on the table before I die, and I don't want to do that. I want to actualize my human potential, push the envelope, and in the words of famous ski racer Alberto Tomba, I remember him, tear down the sky. Talk to me about that, your fear.
There was a famous clergyman by the name of Henry Ward Beecher, and he said, hold yourself to a higher standard than anybody else expects of you. And that always resonated with me. And I honestly, to this day, I don't know why that resonates so much with me, but I put more pressure on myself than any employer or anybody else in my family, my outside circle would ever put on me. And sometimes it's a burden because you're constantly under the gun. You're constantly trying to improve and evolve and grow and develop and progress. But it lights a fire under you also. So it's just this growing desire to not, the worst thing, I've seen people on their deathbed and they have all these regrets. I wish I would have traveled more. I wish I would have learned to play the piano. I wish I would have spent more time with my family. I wish I would have pursued more career aspirations. And I just don't want to be that person. I want to have a big smile on my face and say, I'm ready for the next chapter.
Wow. Can you repeat that one more time? Because I know someone right now is listening, like, put more, because people are like, I want to write that in my notes in my phone right now. What's that quote that you go by?
Oh, hold yourself to a higher standard than anyone else expects of you. That's Henry Ward Beecher, clergyman.
That is good.
Yeah,
that is good.
Yeah.
We could end this podcast right now. We'll be good. Folks.
Well, it's one of those things, like, what do you do when nobody's watching, right? And it's endemic of your character. Who are you? What do you do when nobody's watching? And that's why you hear people like, I don't know, I just watched Conor McGregor has a new documentary called Notorious, and regardless of what you think of Conor McGregor, he's kind of grown on me, and part of what's grown on me is his self-belief and his evolution as a human being. I now saw his last fight, Tony Robbins was in his corner.
Yep.
And so he's obviously got a relationship with Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is not going to mess around with you. He's not going to BS you. He's going to tell you how it is.
That's right.
And it takes a humble person to be able to say, hey, I need a mentor. I need somebody that's more powerful than me. And this is Conor McGregor. He thinks like he's the strongest individual on the face of the earth. But he even recognizes, hey, I need to grow and evolve and develop. And that belief in yourself, but also the belief in others, is huge in somebody's progression.
So let me ask you, when you talk about fears in your life and not wanting to live with regrets and wanting to smile more, what's making you smile the most these days?
Well, my daughter. I mean, I've got a 13-year-old daughter, and so I just ooh and on, fawn over her like any you know the deal. And so, but it's interesting too, because I tell you, I learn a lot from her. I learned how to slow down sometimes. I learned how to smile. She's very goofy and silly, and she dances. And, you know, the Super Bowl, we're watching the halftime, and I look over here, and Shakira is like, you know, shaking and doing everything. I look over to my right. Brooke is like tearing it up too. I said, this is crazy. There's women dancing everywhere. But her,
and then you were.
Yeah. And then I was kind of in my chair, you know, doing like the Snoopy or the Charlie Brown happy dance, you know. But that love for life and that ability to slow down and be comedic and just enjoy and take the stress off.
Yeah.
And I like being around people like that, like my daughter.
What's the hardest thing about parenting, do you feel? She's 13.
Well, you know, 13-year-olds are very impressionable and vulnerable. And then I think back to what I was doing at 14, 15, 16, not always the smartest decisions. And so I worry about that. But you know, you set an example how you live your life, and kids will model that. Kids model behavior.
Right.
I mean, so if you're out drinking, drug, and acting a fool, guess what your kids are going to be doing?
That's right.
But if you're working hard, you're honest, you've got integrity, you're kind and gentle and loving and compassionate, kids will fall in line. They might have their phases, but they'll fall in line.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the best things that I know about you and having the opportunity to work with you on many levels is you as a dad, because I know you're grinding and I know you're training hard and I know you've got all these creations and inventions and I know you're traveling, but your commitment to your daughter is amazing. And I see it. I know we talked on the phone recently. It was like 10 o'clock at night back there, and you were like coming home from volleyball practice at 10 o'clock. I'm like, wait a second, volleyball practice at 10 o'clock at night. The love that a parent will do many times goes unnoticed on that stuff. So I just want to give you kudos because of your commitment and love to your daughter. It's not always easy when you're tired and you're giving your all, because I know the energy that you put out and expend with what you do. So out of all your accomplishments, which are many, I would say that would be your greatest one that I see.
I couldn't agree more. And you know, you're the greatest power in your life is to positively influence other individuals. I think that's one of the meanings of life, to be honest, is just how you treat and elevate others around you, how you make your workplace, your home environment a better place to live and flourish. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, if that's the only thing I accomplish in my life is being a good father, I'm ahead of the game.
Amen. I want to step back. You are a national champion in Tae-Kwon-Do. So I want you to talk about this, because I've seen pictures of you when you were like 20, 21 years old, and your foot strike and kick is like higher than your head. I'm thinking, man, I would tear a groin if I did that right now or tried to. I'm assuming you started Taekwondo when you were a young kid and worked your way up through the ranks and became a national champion?
No. I had a very unorthodox foray into Taekwondo. I actually didn't start till I was 20, 21.
What?
So yeah, it was.
You started Taekwondo when you were 20?
Yeah.
How old were you when you became a national champ?
24.
Talk about this. That's okay. What were you before that? Were you soccer, football?
Yeah. So I started out, I was a competitive soccer player. Okay. And I think I attribute all my footwork and athleticism to soccer. But I grew up in Colorado when I was 7, kind of moved to Colorado, and I was involved in mountain sports, biking, hiking, skiing, mogul skiing, freestyle skiing, big mountain skiing. And then also played soccer, football, baseball, basketball, lacrosse. I mean, I loved sports. I really did. Anything that involved movement. And so I think that's where I developed my footwork. But it's like the old Chinese Kung Fu movie, right?
Bruce Lee.
So I'm at Highline Athletic Club, YMCA, back in the day. And I am mopping. I'm on the maintenance staff, and I'm mopping floors, right? And there was racquetball courts. Number 7 was where the Taekwondo team was practicing. And number 6 was the cleanest court in the entire gymnasium, because I would sit and mop court 6 and watch court 7 as they trained every single day I worked. And finally, one day the Taekwondo instructor came out, and he almost had like a disturbed look on his face. And he said, "Why don't you put the mop down and come train?" And I had this, oh, gee, shucks, I can't afford it. I don't have a uniform. And he said, "Listen, son, first of all, you're an employee, so it's half price. And second of all, you don't need a uniform to practice in my gym." And I put the mop down, and I started training. And the start of a lifelong love affair with martial arts.
What was his name?
His name was Tommy Shore. And he had the best sidekick in the business. And that's where I developed my sidekick, which is it's really popular in Taekwondo. Other martial arts like karate and other striking martial arts don't use that kick as much, but it is so effective. And if you watch John Jones, Conor McGregor, Anthony Pettis, these guys have a lead leg and a rear leg sidekick.
Would you say that he was your Mr. Miyagi?
Well, he started out, and then after I got to my blue belt, this was like a year into it, a year and a half, I had kind of surpassed all the other students in the class. And my coach looked at me and said, Pete, I got nothing left to offer you here. You got to go down to Foothills Taekwondo. And so I went to Foothills Taekwondo, kind of full of oomph and vigor and moxie. I was a little cocky, to be honest. And I hear blue belt with a red stripe, and I'm walking in, and I was fit. I'm very athletic, kind of a freak athlete back then. And I walk in there, and all of a sudden we line up to spar, and there's about 12 black belts. Some of them are kids, like 15 years old. Some of them are 45. A couple big dudes at the end, and it's called the gauntlet. And you spar for 30 seconds, and you go from one to the next to the next. And I mean, it was like a pinball wizard. My head was spun around. My nose was broken, and I couldn't let down. I wanted to prove myself. It was the first night of sparring, and I mean, I was banged up and bunged up to the point where at the end of that session, I thought maybe this isn't for me. Like, I thought it was so good, and I was just humiliated. Bloody nose, black eye. And then I just kept showing up. Within about 6 months, guess what? Guess who was walking down the gauntlet, and everybody was scared of me because I just trained with better people, people that were far superior than me. And I learned how to block the kicks, learned how to throw the punches, and really developed into a higher level martial artist just because I pushed myself into that environment.
And you were at that time, what, 20 now, 21, 22?
Maybe 22, 23. And then I tested for my red belt with a black stripe. It's like right before you get your black belt. And my coach said, Pete, the way you're accelerating and progressing in the sport, I think you could have a chance to be on the national team. And I kind of stopped in my tracks. And I said, are you serious? Like, national team? We were getting ready to go to Malaysia the next year to compete at the World Championships in Kuala Terengganu, Malaysia. And he says, you got to be black belt to compete. So we got to first get your testing out of the way. So, testing is a big deal. It's normally you spend a year or two preparing for your black belt testing. I had 6 months. And I trained every single day, like 8 days a week. I mean, I stretched every single day, 3 times a day. I trained, did strength and conditioning. It was really one of my fascinations with strength and conditioning and physical therapy. It's one of the reasons I got into physical therapy, because I was always injured, because I was clearly overtraining. It wasn't smart, intelligent design. But sure enough, I tested for my black belt, had the high test score, and then nationals were a few months later, and I went to nationals, and it was rough, but I made the national team. I did really well in sparring and power breaking, and
became the captain.
Not that year. I was 3 years later, and at the World Championships in St. Petersburg, Russia. That was a great nationals. I was first in sparring, first in power breaking, first in patterns, and I was selected as the captain for the national team.
Why? Because becoming a captain is a leadership. Role.
It's a leadership. Probably back to that earlier statement I made about Henry Ward Beecher. I just held myself to a high standard. I was the first one to show up. I would do strength and conditioning an hour before and run track an hour before a practice, and then I was the last one to leave. And I think everybody around me just tried to keep up with me. Yeah. And I started to gain some confidence too in my abilities. I've been fairly shy historically and introverted historically, and my personality, as I got better and more competent at my craft, my personality started to come out, and I was a little bit more vocal and demonstrative in what we were trying to do as a national team and winning. I'm
curious, what was driving you during this time? Because let's say I see this progress, I hear about it. You're first. It's easy to keep going when you're first. Like but what for 3-4 years you're trying to get to the top, and you're getting these wins, and you're ascending up the ranks. But deep down, what was it that was driving you? Was it to be a national champion? Was it to become a team captain? Were you trying to prove something to yourself or to your mom or your dad? Like, what was it that really was driving you deep down?
Yeah, that's a big question, Todd, and it kind of strikes a nerve. In middle school, I was bullied, and it's amazing how you see it on TV, and it's kind of like not a big deal, and kids getting pushed around and locked in lockers and beaten up, but it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and the psychological toll when you're young and impressionable and vulnerable, and you get bullied and you get locked in a locker, and the janitor finds you after hours. It's humiliating, and you just never want to have that feeling again. And that
happened to you?
Yeah. I wasn't always big and strong and powerful. I was weak and timid and kind of a gangly, awkward young guy. Very slow to develop. I graduated high school. I was 17 when I graduated high school, and so I was kind of early with all that. And to this day, I don't know why kids picked on me. I wasn't mean. I was actually very quiet. I didn't say anything, and maybe that's why. But it lit a fire in me, and I'm sure to this day it's why I'm so driven. So Dan Hobbs, thank you very much.
Wow, Dan Hobbs. I love
yeah.
Dan. Yeah,
but and listen, when you're 12, 13, 14 years old, it wasn't his fault.
Yep.
He was struggling with his own issues, right?
That's right.
He was, maybe his parents were abusing him, or maybe other kids were picking on him, or he had his own insecurities. And there was, other kids than that that were involved. But everybody's struggling, but man, and that's why I look at my daughter. She's 13 now. And whenever I talk to young kids, I say three things imperative, categorical: don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. But the fourth thing is don't bully, because your people are impressionable, and we've got tremendous rates of childhood suicide on the rise. It is not acceptable. And so you got to really keep in mind how you treat people, and how you need to respect and empathize with others.
So what would you say to that boy or girl today who is being bullied? That 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grader, that young kid who's being bullied today because that was you. What would you tell them? I hope you're enjoying this episode. As a matter of fact, before you hear the rest of the amazing story, let's hear a word from one of our sponsors. Hey guys, today's episode is sponsored by my friends over at Carnosine Beta-Alanine. Let me ask you a question. Who's looking to amp up your workout routine, your training routine? You want to get stronger, faster, more explosive? You want to improve your endurance? Well, my friends, Carnosine Beta-Alanine is an ingredient found with many of the top pre- and post-workout supplements. Along with the right training program and the proper nutrition, you got to eat right. Carnosine Beta-Alanine is going to help build your strength, endurance, and your power. How do you do it? Well, essentially 3.2 grams a day. You want to essentially get 90 grams over a 28-day period, about 3.2 grams per day, and you're going to love the way you feel on it. I've been using it for over 20 years, literally on my workout days, on my non-workout days, and I endorse it heavily with my athletes. Why? Because when you're looking for the edge and when you expect the best out of your body, you got to make sure you eat right, you train hard, you're constantly living inspired. And my friends over at Carnosine Beta-Alanine have the best product on the planet. Over 55 independent studies show that it has 0 banned substances. That's an important thing. You always want to put the right stuff in your bodies. Go to team.carnosine.com, check it out in the Find It section. You go to your local health food store, or just go to team.carnosine.com and pick some up today.
Right. Well, it's not your fault, first of all, because the first thing you think is, I'm doing something wrong. I'm worthy of being treated like this. You're not worthy of being treated like this. Nobody's worthy of being treated like that. The second thing is, the sun will shine again, right? I mean, this is not your life. This is a snapshot. This is a phase in your life, and you can use it to fuel yourself.
That's right. and that's what it did for you. And I find that impressive because I did not know that story. Talk about lighting a fire, about asking, hey, how did you become a national champion in Tae-Kwon-Do? Who would have thunk that this young kid who was being bullied at 12, 13 years old would eventually, 10 years plus later, become a national champion in a sport? So thank you for sharing that, Pete. I know that's not easy on that. Wow. So fast forward, you're a national champion in Taekwondo, and somehow you end up in the fitness space. How did that all happen? Because just folks, if you don't know, if you're not in the industry, if you're in the industry, I'm preaching to the choir because you know who Pete Holman is, unless you've been living under a rock or you've been in a cave. But if you're not in the fitness industry, this guy has been absolutely hustling for 30 plus years in the industry, making massive strides for not only his life, but for the industry, and how many hundreds of times you've presented worldwide. How did that all get started? And was it because of Taekwondo, because of, your athletic development? How did you get into fitness?
I mean, fitness was my junior year of high school was one of those years that I like to erase from the map. I was, to be honest with you, I was hanging around people that weren't doing healthy, positive things. We were drinking, we were drugging. It was a terrible year for me. I didn't play one sport. I was a pretty high-level athlete, but I think I hit a phase where I was pretty awkward and gangly, and my neuromuscular control at 16 was not that great. And that was when I was in my junior year. And so I didn't play any sports. My grades dropped. And I'm walking by the strength and conditioning facility at the end of the year. And there was a poster on the wall outside. And it said, summer football training camp starts now. And, anybody's welcome to train in the gym. And so I'm sitting out there reading this. And some guy kind of looks at me. And I acted like I wasn't looking. And I tried to look away. And then all of a sudden the door opens, and this guy's like, it's almost like the Taekwondo story. He's like, hey, are you going to come train, or what are you doing there, kid? And I said, oh, yeah, I guess I'm going to come train. So I walked in, he introduced himself, and I said, the thing is, I'm kind of embarrassed. I don't have no clue what to do in the gym. When you're 16 and you don't know how to weightlift, and there's all these big, strong football athletes in the gym, it's intimidating. Yep. I mean, that's why people don't want to step foot inside the door. And he said, hey, just do this. He showed me calf raises and dips, on a dip bar. Yeah. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, he just go back and forth between these. And then he was training these other guys. So I start doing this, and I do a set, and then I go back to the dip bar and do another set, and then I do calf raises. And like 40 minutes goes by, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of, something might be wrong with my sternum, and I'm not feeling well. And he's like, yeah, it's probably good. And I could not walk Todd Durkin for literally have you ever done calf raises for the first time and done like 10 or 12 sets?
No, I haven't. It's 3 sets.
It's the worst programming design I've ever seen. But anyhow, I was hooked on fitness.
Is that why you have those calves you have today?
Yeah, no. You would have thunk, right? I'd have developed calves. But that guy, and the funny thing is, he's a guy, I don't even remember his name. I don't remember the strength coach's name. He literally got me involved in strength and conditioning, and I don't remember his name. And that's the power we have as personal trainers, as yoga instructors, as Pilates instructors, as strength coaches, to get somebody involved in something that they're awkward at, they don't know anything about, and to literally change their lives.
You know what I love about this? Talk about fitness right now? Right now as we speak, right outside this office, there's jam balls being slammed. I hope y'all can hear it. I mean, we got people box jumping against the wall. I hope they can hear that, because right now, I'm fired up, because think about when you got started. I'm looking out here, and there's people moving everywhere, and that's a beautiful thing. Moving. Matter of fact, as you're listening to the podcast right now, maybe you're moving. Maybe you're out walking the dog. You're out for a run. You hear Holman talking about what it takes to be your absolute best. And I got med balls slamming. I mean, I'm fired up right now.
Well, it's the environment. I mean, I was talking to one of your trainers this morning, and he's basically on cruise control, right? Because he's got these guys moving around. And I said, it's kind of easy when you have people twice your age that are working as hard as you across the room.
That's right.
What are you going to do? You're going to work hard, right?
Yeah.
So it's the environment. You got the music going on. Everybody's training. Everybody's lifting. Everybody's moving. Everybody's smiling, bantering back and forth. That's a healthy environment, and that's what it's hard to build a culture and a community around fitness, right? It doesn't all have to be hardcore, gothic rogue type, in a dungeon where you're basically beating yourself to a pulp. It's about feeling better when you leave. And these people here, they come here, they train hard, but they feel better when they leave.
So you trained here for an hour before we recorded this podcast. What did you learn or see that you could share with our listeners today at Fitness Quest 10?
Well, one of the trainers is ex-military, and I said, "Hey, man, you're doing some cool stuff." And he says, "Yeah, it was interesting. I got out of the military, and I put on like 60 pounds because he was used to so much, rigorous physical exercise." And he said, and I had to figure out how to get the weight off. And so that story now kind of transfers into my training my clients. I've got a personal story, and it goes back to that, without tragedy, there is no triumph. Without a setback, there is no comeback. And without a test, there is no testimony. And that's what he was talking about. He's like, you have to walk through it and live through it to be able to share that with others.
In your 30-year career now in fitness, you've developed quite a few products. Is there one that stands out to you as like that's your baby? I mean, the TRX Rip Trainer, the Glute Drive, the Functional Training Rack. You've got some other things coming. Is there one that kind of is like that's your baby?
Well, it's interesting. So I started out with the Functional Training Rack, which was kind of a training medicine ball rack on steroids. And back in the day when I was in physical therapy, there was very poor organization of your functional training gear. So you could never find foam rollers. You could never find the sport cords, or they were laying on the ground. So I created this rack that was basically a medicine ball rack that had antennas that would hold elastic resistance. It had canisters that would hold foam rollers and yoga mats. And it had a little space for tilt board or Bosu ball behind it. And I thought that was great. And I got the bug for like, hey, you can solve problems in the industry with your creativity and your ingenuity. So the next one was the TRX Rip Trainer, and that was kind of my baby. I love the Rip Trainer because I'm a rotational athlete, and this product's all about controlling rotation and producing rotation. The problem with the Rip Trainer, it's very hard to coach. It's very hard to learn how to utilize. And so I thought I need to get more simplistic in my approach to designing fitness equipment. And so my favorite latest addition is the Nautilus Glute Drive. It's a machine. It's a plate-loaded hip thrust machine. Most people know what a glute bridge is. If you've ever had a back injury or a knee injury and you're rehabbing, you get on your back, you bend your knees at 90 degrees, and you kind of lift your hips up off the ground, and it fires your glutes and your hamstrings. That's called the posterior chain, and it's the powerhouse of your entire body. So it's a very important exercise. Well, once you get strong at that, how do you progress? You got to load weights on it. So I created something called the Nautilus Glute Drive, where you can actually lay on a bench that's elevated. It articulates up and down, and you're doing that hip bridging motion, but now you're elevated, so you get more range of motion, and you can actually load weights on your waist. And it's really changed the game in strength and conditioning for the glutes.
Yeah.
We've sold 3,000 units the first year, and it's just gone gangbusters. And so I'm really proud of that. And it was hard. I mean, I finally got my first patent on that just December 18th, 2019. I got my first patent on the safety catch mechanism and a couple other claims on that Nautilus Glute Drive. And so, yeah, long process.
You know what's amazing about this is you are a scientist and you're an inventor. Usually you don't see, like if you're a creator and inventor, you're all like right brain creating. But you also have the left brain, like very, very scientific, anatomy, physical therapy, and then you have the creative side, and you marry the two together. And I think that makes you very unique on how you do this, because you have the creative side, and then you actually execute it with what you do from a training side as well. It's very unique.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's almost more of a simplistic mind. I mean, I'm very pragmatic about my approach. And I remember taking organic chemistry, and once stuff gets small and kind of wafy, I had a very difficult time in organic chemistry. When we started talking about physics and lever bars and moment arms and how things work in three-dimensional space, that I understood. And I just like to solve problems. I get frustrated. I see something in the gym. In fact, the Nautilus glute drive started because I was doing hip thrusts with a client, and their shoulders hurt. I had them elevated on a horizontal bench, and the guy was, articulating on this bench, and he says, it kind of hurts my shoulders. And my first thought is wimp, but then I was like professional. I said, okay, well, let's get you an Eric's foam pad, and we'll put the pad behind your shoulders. And as he's articulating on this bench, I noticed the Eric's foam pad's rotating like a fulcrum. And I said, that's interesting. Why isn't there a machine that just allows you to articulate like that with a back pad that rotates with you? And that was the genesis of this machine. That one instant with my client trying to solve a problem.
I like that. Pete, if there is a fitness coach, a trainer listening in today, what would be one piece of advice that you would give that coach, that trainer who's training people like yourself, like me, in the gym every day trying to change lives? If there's one piece of advice, I know that you have thousands, but what would be one thing that you would offer them to motivate them, inspire them, or educate them?
One thing is tough. I've got a number of things, but it starts with being patient. I see, and it's funny because I've got, get a few thousand followers on some of my social media platforms, and some of them are young coaches. And so they're very eager, and they're excited, and they're motivated. How do I get into product inventing? How do I get into presenting for IDEA or some of these other organizations? And I start doing some research on the person, and they're like 26 years old. And I said, well, first of all, you got to put some time in. You got to learn your craft. You got to go to every continuing education seminar you can, whether it's, FMS or a stick mobility or strong first, kettlebell training, Olympic lifting. You got to learn your craft and master that. Be the best trainer on the floor. And then once you're the best trainer on the floor, now you got to start thinking about alternative revenue streams. And this is something I've been so impressed with you, Todd, because you're the master of this, right? You start out, you're a trainer, you're a massage therapist. Then you say, I really need my own facility. I'm kind of the best of the best, but I need my own facility to practice at. Doesn't mean you have to start your own facility.
Right.
But, maybe you go in with some other people and you start a facility, an adjunct facility. Maybe you rent a small space and try it out. But you need to start creating some alternative revenue streams. Then you end up with people that study underneath you. You're training them. They become your trainers. They're bringing in revenue. Looking at online coaching now, which is pretty easy to get into. Online coaching, fitness product invention, writing. You got to write content. But all this stuff is work. It's arduous, and you're not going to get paid at the start. So you have to kind of hunker down.
It's great.
In this industry, there's not tons of Mark Zuckerbergs. You have to kind of put in your time. Now, however, there is Instagram and social media, which is changing the game. If you've got a beautiful physique, if you're an ex-athlete, you can hurdle over some of these things faster.
Well, and that's incredible wisdom. So thank you for sharing that. For any of you coaches that are listening out there, what I'd say is always make it about the people. Always make it about the people. Don't make it about yourself. Right? I think sometimes, quote, young trainers or trainers new to the industry, it's about themselves. And how do you turn it around? Because if you've got several people who you train, they all have unique stories. They have situations. They have diagnoses, prognoses. They have got goals. They've got aspirations. How can you help people solve their problems? And I don't care what industry, what business you're in, by the way. It's find the problem and help people solve more problems, and then you're going to be more successful at what you do. So always make it about the people. Don't make it about yourself. And that's one of the common mistakes I see amongst some of the, quote, young trainers on that. So I think that's awesome, Pete. I want to talk about mindset because you're a mindset guy. I'm a mindset guy. And two questions for you. The first one is you recently had a knee replacement. November 2019, you had a knee replacement. And just a couple weeks later, I'm like watching you on Instagram do like crazy stuff. I'm like, wait a second, Pete. I'm like calling you up, Pete, you better slow down. Like you shouldn't be doing all these squats and TRX exercises. I'm like, what is he? I'm like looking at Melanie, you're like climbing mountains and you're in the ice of Colorado. If there was a lesson or two from your knee replacement, what did you get out of that experience? And again, as we film this, you're just a couple months out of your knee replacement as well. But what would be a couple of the lessons you learned?
rehab is a process. And what you start to realize is that it's analogous to life, correct? We want, hearkening back to the previous statement about trainers wanting to excel and speed jump over hurdles.
Right.
It's a process. And so you're trying to accelerate the process. Every rehab specialist wants to do that. But it's still a process, and biological bone healing is 6 to 8 weeks on a normal fracture. When you have, the end of your tibia and the end of your femoral condyle sawed off in an invasive procedure, it's more like 10 to 12 weeks for really good bone healing. And so you can't rush that too much. You've got to, go through the steps,
the healing process,
and you got to nurture yourself and take care of yourself. It also was a time for me to reflect on things that are important in my life, because you've got some downtime. Even if I really only rested a week. I was back to work the second week, which was out of necessity, but it's not recommended. But even in that week, you're sitting on your couch at the start and you're like, okay, I got nothing but time. I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. And so you start to reflect on where you're at in your life, where you want to go, and how you're going to get there. And it was a beautiful time for me to look at kind of my strategic plan for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, and reflect on my life and where I'm at.
I remember seeing you go to work. I'm like, he's already working. It took me 2 weeks and I had my knee replaced. I'm like, I was down in, I was on a walker at 2 weeks. I was like, man, he's killing this thing. But you embrace the healing as a physical therapist, the healing process. I talk about that, and everyone has a different healing rate, but you have to honor that as well. The fascia, the elastin, the collagen has been cut into, and I know physically, that's one thing we share in common, by the way, are those new bionic knees.
Androids.
Yes. And to see you moving now and getting your energy back to who you really are is amazing. And I think anyone who has had injury, surgery, you have to make sure that you honor that process, but you also have to make sure in the physical therapy that you attack that in a way that like you're a pro athlete. Speaking of which, the second question I have for you is, I'm going to share a story that I don't know if you remember this or not, but during the NFL football season, this past NFL football season, one of my clients, Drew Brees, got hurt. He tore a muscle in his thumb. And I remember talking to you because I was frustrated. I don't know if you guys are trainers out there, when you have a client who gets injured, regardless if they're an athlete or not, if someone tweaks a muscle when you're training them or in their activities, you feel every pain. And I was frustrated that Drew was hurt. I was like, man, should I have done more like thumb curls? right? And anyway, you said something really interesting on the phone with me about the warrior mentality. Can you reiterate what you told me? Because I was like, man, Holman thinks in a completely different way, because when you get hurt, you're not happy. But you said something. Do you remember what you said?
I do. I remember that vividly, because you forced me to get on Voxer, which I still don't even know what the heck this Voxer thing is, but it's some kind of voice app, and everybody. So Drew Brees gets hurt, and of course everybody's hearts stop, and the entire state of New Orleans is like, "Are you kidding me?" And so you put out a message, and I could hear it in your voice. You're always so upbeat and so energetic and so optimistic and positive, and you were just like, gosh, you work so hard with this athlete, and this was his year, and this was the comeback. This could have been a Super Bowl potential year. And some of the other folks on the Voxer app were saying kind of same things. I'm so sorry. This is tragic. This is heartbreaking. This is disheartening. And I just got pissed off. I was like, all right, enough of this pity party. And so my message was something like, hey, man, this is perfect. This is great. This is what Drew Brees needed. He needed to get injured so that he could come back and prove to everybody that he's the greatest quarterback on the face of the earth. And it goes back to anything we do in life and the process. Without adversity, there's no growth. There's no evolution. There's no progress. So, I'm not saying you're going out and looking for adversity and tragedy, but that is life. And that's the biggest mistake people make, including myself. I've been there before, where you go along and you think your life is just going to be this smooth, like Bruno Mars, skating down the runway, dancing along, and it doesn't work that way. Now, with that being said, there's a famous book by Mitch Albom called Tuesdays with Maury. I don't know if anybody's ever read that. It's worth a read because in there, Maury is dying. He's got terminal degenerative disease, and he's dying. And this guy Mitch Albom's interviewing him, and just he's amazed by this guy who's dying, and he's got all this positivism and energy. And he says, "How do you do it?" And you looked at Mitch, and he said, "Listen, kid, there's days I wake up and I cry for 10 minutes straight. I'm crying, but then I open up the blinds to the window to my room, and I see the finches playing around outside. The spring buds are blossoming. The clouds are making patterns." And I kind of get my second wind, and I feel like I'm going to maximize this day and live to my fullest for whatever time I have left here on earth. And so it's okay to mourn. And I'm sure Drew Brees spent a day or two like, are you kidding me? But then I know that guy. I guarantee 2 days later, he's like, okay, training, footwork, agility, cardio, physical therapy. I got this, no problem. I can't wait till I get back on the field. And that's the mentality you have to have in life.
Yeah. And that's called the warrior mentality. And that's what you shared about that is why we train is so that when adversity strikes us, smack in the face, we get kicked in the gut, is that you can get up and keep going. And I never forget that because it was you said that's why we train. You don't have to be a pro athlete to have that warrior mentality, right? Like it's any one of us listening in right now. If you're kicked in the gut, if you're curled up in a ball, life is throwing you for a curveball, and you're facing something really difficult right now. You or your child or your parent or a good friend is facing something. You may have that pity party for a few minutes or a few days, but ultimately you've got to have that warrior mentality to get up and get back into the game as well. And
you said something important. How do you get that warrior mentality? It's practice. You got to train. And that's the beauty of going to the gym and putting yourself under duress and doing something you don't want to be doing and pushing around some weight and getting on the treadmill and sweating. Because when you get knocked down, you've got to have strength, you got to have energy, you got to have vigor, and you got to have some mental resiliency and toughness. And where do you get it? It's in the gym. I mean, Sun Tzu said that every battle is won before it's even fought. It's in the training and the preparation. So, I mean, the days you don't want to get into the gym, you got to get there and do something, and it's going to prepare you for those adversities in life.
So I got to ask you. You've invented products. You've had national championships. You've done a lot of things in your life. But recently you wrote your first book. And it's a fiction book. I got to get the backstory on the book. Why did you write a book? How long did it take you? Tell me about Cruise and why the heck you wrote a fiction book.
This is a crazy story. I mean, I was with TRX, and I was traveling around the globe. Literally every other week. It was Germany, London, Thailand, Asia. And I was lecturing on strength and conditioning and core activation and core performance, posture, and all the stuff that we love in strength and conditioning. But I'm telling you, you do that stuff 24/7 on the road, and you get burnt out. So I'm on a trip back from Thailand. It's like a 12-hour trip. And so I'm like, I'm going to sit down and do a nice movie. So I watched my first movie, and I'm like, ooh, I like that. I'm going to watch another movie. And so two movies into it, it's like 3 hours, right? I've still got 9.5 hours of flight. And I'm like, okay, I can't watch another movie. Maybe I'll write. And I was so burnt out on strength and conditioning, I said, why don't I write something creative? There's like no thought process involved. Something productive, creative, that comes from the heart. And I started to create this character. And I said, well, what would the character be? And it'd have to be an underdog, right? It'd have to be an athlete. They'd have to overcome great odds and adversity. They'd have to be bullied, right? Because that's part of my story. And this Manuel Cruz Delgado character came to mind, and I started writing. And it was just a fun hobby. So every time I traveled with TRX, which was pretty frequent, I'd write. It was like a creative, cathartic process for me. That started in 2011 or 2012, and it took me 7-8 years later to finally finish the book. Wow. But 305 pages, fictional book. It's done, and I'm really proud of it. It was a big stretch, and that's something that if you want to achieve. And I'm not saying that greatness in that I'm some published amazing author, but I'm saying when you want to push yourself and achieve things outside of your comfort zone, you gotta step outside of your comfort zone and try something different. And writing fiction was definitely outside of my comfort zone. And it's amazing because you can write about whatever you want to write about. The problem is you can write about whatever you want to write about. And so sometimes you sit there and you're like, there's too many avenues. There's too many places to go. How do I string things together? And how do I develop and evolve these characters? And what's the red thread? And how am I going to conclude this? And it's pretty overwhelming. So fictional writing is next level stuff, but I really enjoyed it.
Would you say that's part of your own self-actualization?
Absolutely. I mean, Mr. Lyman, by the way, this was back when I was being bullied in 7th, 8th grade. I had this English teacher. His name was Mr. Lyman. It's probably one of the only teachers I remember from school. And this guy was so passionate and so enthusiastic about reading and writing and literature. And we would read Edgar Allan Poe and Fitzgerald and all these amazing authors. And you had no choice but to fall in love with reading and writing. And he planted the seed in my head back then. He said, Pete Holman, one day you're going to write a book. And I thought he was just joking. And sure enough, 40 or 35 years later, I wrote a book.
Huh. If someone out there was really looking to go deeper and really explore like their own self-actualization, are there specific traits, are there things that you would recommend one do to work on themselves? Obviously, listening to a podcast is one, but are there specific traits that you'd say, hey, have the insatiable curiosity, or what are a few of those things?
I mean that is primarily it. You've got to be curious. And I know some people are more curious than others. Some people are busier than others. If you're raising a family and you got young newborns running around and you're working and you're trying to feed kids and still have a relationship with your partner, it's very difficult. But that's phasic, right? That's not going to be forever.
Right.
So you have to look at your life in phases and maybe at certain phases you're focused on family, certain phases you're focused on work, but at some phase you got to focus on yourself and what else it is that inspires you. Joseph Campbell, the famous author, once wrote, "Follow your bliss." Follow your bliss. And I think it's one of the most beautiful sayings I've ever heard, because what excites you? What are you curious about? What do you want to learn about? And I don't care if it's you reading. I don't care if you want to start a butterfly collection or if you want to start to learn an instrument, piano, guitar, saxophone. But what excites you, you got to try some different things and then follow it with reckless abandon. If you're going to do it, you may as well do it.
Deep stuff. Can y'all see why I love Pete Holman? Do we have any new Pete Holman fans out there? You can see how deep he is, and when you see the fire and the spirit and the energy out in the universe, you can see where it comes from and why he is doing what he's doing. Pete, what's next? What's going on in your life? Is there anything that you're working on that we need to know about, or what? Because you're always doing something interesting.
Oh my God, I've got so much going on, and it's all wonderful, and it's all a little overwhelming at the same time. I'm getting into some online digital education that I've coordinated with Idea Fit PT. And so we're creating a course that's going to be called Foundational Movement Assessment and Kinesiology Modeling. I'm very excited about this course because it basically takes people in the healthcare profession and it teaches you, it's like a condensed anatomy kinesiology course, but related to foundational movements, which is what we do in everyday life in sports: pushing, pulling, changing in elevation, rotation, hinging, all that stuff. So I'm going to break all that down. So that's great for strength coaches. I've got a new product that's in the works. I'm hoping to launch at URSA 2020, which is March. It's a famous trade show in North America. It's held in California, and it's where all the fitness product iterations and inventions and new concepts come out each year, and all the gym owners and managers and CEOs come down to see what's latest and greatest. And I've got a product that is going to revolutionize, I think, loaded carries, which is kind of how you get farm strong, right? It's all about grips, hips, and core. So that's very...
I like that title right there: hips, grips, and core.
Yeah. And then, I'm still striving to become Eric Clapton on the guitar. That's one of my favorite, hobbies and pastimes is playing guitar. So it sounds like a silly goal, but I want one day the sun will shine on my guitar. That's what Eric Clapton said, and I'm following that pursuit.
The Renaissance man who plays
continues.
guitar. Wow. Well, Pete, I want to thank you for today. And, folks, I want to encourage you, number one, to go get Cruise, to go get that book. Amazon, the best place, or your website?
Amazon.com. Yeah, Pete Holman, Cruise by Pete Holman at Amazon.com. Yeah.
There you go. Check that out and then hit him up and let him know what you think, because he spent the better part of 8 years writing that book on many airplanes. And I know you're proud of Cruise. And I know that part of the proceeds also go to a foundation. Is that correct?
Yes, World Bicycle Relief Foundation, which is provides bicycles to disenfranchised and impoverished kids in Africa. It's just amazing. Kids in Africa, there's no transportation when you're in Africa. So there's no bus system, there's no cars. The only thing they have is bikes, and you have to be really well off to have a bike. And so this organization, it's pretty cool. They provide bikes to these kids, and it literally changes their lives. So I'm excited about that, to give some proceeds to them.
Well, I love the fact that you not only wrote the book, but a portion of the proceeds from the book go back to help other people, and I call that impact. So Thank you. Last question for you. Legacy. What's the legacy of Pete Holman going to be about?
It's a loaded question. I want to impact as many people and elevate as many people on the face of the earth as I can. I want to help elevate others. And so, I think the meaning of life, not to get deep, is twofold. The first is to serve others. How do we elevate those around us? And the second is, how do we elevate ourselves? And that's what we've been talking about, is self-actualization. And they aren't mutually exclusive. In other words, if you elevate yourself, you have more gifts and ability to elevate others and help impact others. So, that's my only goal. I'd love to have financial success and reap the rewards of being an entrepreneur. But above that and anything else, I want to help elevate others.
Well, I know you're already doing an amazing job at that, because you've impacted thousands of people, but I know your vision moving forward is even way bigger than that, as you impact not only fit pros and coaches worldwide, but also a lot of just fitness enthusiasts, weekend warriors, everyday high performers who are looking to be their best version of themselves as well. And I hope today's episode served you all well. Pete, if someone wants to learn more about you, follow you, where can they do that?
I'm on Instagram at Pete Holman 1, the number 1. On Twitter at Pete Holman 1, and I'm on Facebook at Pete Holman. I've got 2 accounts on Facebook. It drives me nuts because one of the accounts got capped at 5,000 people. So, play around. So hopefully you can find the right
search Pete Holman,
the right account there. And then, one last thing I want to say about people, because I know everybody has goals and aspirations, and the biggest fear and risk is falling short. And I want to share with you a quote from Bruce Lee. It's my favorite quote of all time. He once said, "In any passionate pursuit, the pursuit counts more than the object being pursued." The pursuit counts more than the object being pursued. So all your growth and all your evolution and development happens in that pursuit. Whether you win, lose, draw, it's all about the pursuit. It's about the journey.
Wow. We're going to end on that, because that right there, my friends, is Pete Holman, the Renaissance man, dropping wisdom the entire time. So, Pete, thanks for being here today. Thanks for being in studio here in San Diego. I really appreciate you being here and all that you do.
You too, buddy. Love it.
Guys, there you have it. Another great episode of the Todd Durkin Impact Show, and Pete Holman dropping bombs. I want you to go back and I want you to listen to this episode several times, because if you listen to what Pete was saying, there's some real life wisdom in there about not only looking forward, but looking back and overcoming adversity as well. And as always, if you loved this episode, can you do us a favor, please? As we climb up the podcast ranks, we need you to share. Please share this episode on anywhere that you are hanging out. Are you hanging out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter? please share this episode. If you are writing emails, blogs, newsletters, please share this episode, because I believe what Pete Holman just shared about his life and his quest for from a bullied kid all the way up to a national champion, and what he's doing now to impact the globe truly is going to light a positive light in other people's lives and ultimately create more impact. So thanks for joining us today. Go out there and have an incredible day. Train hard, eat right, and live inspired.